The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Alamex Mabella. Chapter 7. The garden had been transformed into a wonderland. Soft pink peonies and white roses covered every inch of the arbor that had been erected for the sole purpose of Merope and Arber's wedding. Woven by Aberforth, who felt the whole thing was a complete waste of time. Why did weddings always have to turn out to these big, drawn-out, over-the-top things? He was heard grumbling. Abbas grinned through the entire 2 hours, as if it secretly pleased him that his brother was arranging flowers, ignoring the fact that he himself was also arranging flowers. Hermione looked out of the window from the breakfast room and took another long draw from her coffee. Behind her, Merope was practically being spoon-fed by Kinder, her hands shaking so much that not much food made it to her mouth using her own hand.
"Maybe this was a mistake,"
Merope said suddenly, and Hermione perked up, hoping that Merope intended to back out. "You want this to be shot down?" Hermione asked, a manic gleam in her eyes. "Because I will shut it down. I'll do it right now." Merope shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again.
"I don't know.
Maybe we should wait until you do know. I know this whole thing happened so fast." Merope shook her head frantically.
Tom needs a father.
Tom needs a mother who loves him and strong family ties, both of which he would have between the both of us.
But having Albus as his father would change everything, give him the entire package. Isn't that what you wanted?
I considered this a win already, Hermione said between sips of coffee. He was conceived under much different circumstances this time. I don't think he will be as fervent in his desire for eternal life. He will have love and connections and a solid foundation with or without a father. "Trying to talk her out of marrying me already, are we?" Dumbledore asked, twinkling as Merope fled the room, Kinder at her heels, yelling about the last-minute touch-ups. Hermione suspected she was just very, very nervous and didn't want him to see her that way. "I've been trying to talk her out of it before I ever accepted a betrothal on your behalf," Hermione admitted dryly. "I will make a fantastic brother-in-law," Albus said with a smile. He sat down in one of the chairs and made happy noises as Jasper placed a full English breakfast on the table in front of him. "I worry, Albus, that this will harm Tom more in the long run. I know that she doesn't love you, and I know that you don't love her. I need Tom to be happy, and part of making him happy will be treating his mother with love and respect. Can you do that, for as long as you live? Because I would hold you to the letter of the vow. Won't you rather man up and hunt Grindelwald yourself? Being a father to Tom means so much more than teaching him how to ride a broom." "You don't think I'm up for the job?" "Frankly, you make a piss-poor father substitute in the future. So, yes, I'm worried. I regret ever telling Merope of your offer." "Hermione," Albus said as he rose from the table, breakfast forgotten. He rounded the heavy furniture and put his hand on Hermione's shoulder. "I understand how serious this is to you. In fact, I've been reading up on the care and feeding of children. I understand that this will be the hardest thing I've ever do, but it may also be the best thing in my life. Grindelwald is something from my past that I fear, and I know it sounds cowardly, but I would rather do anything else than finding out certain things about that night." "I think you would be better off facing the whole thing. Nothing that you could possibly find out would bring her back to life again. So does it really matter, Ford?" "I doubt either answer will give you the peace of mind you are searching for." "So you know it, all of it. I should have known," Albus said as he dropped his hand and his twinkle. He looked out of the window over Hermione's shoulder but didn't see any of the scenery, one particular moment replaying in his head. "In the beginning, when I first arrived in this time, I came to you first out of every other possible alliance I could have made," Hermione said softly. "I could have gone to any one of the Sacred 28, and they would have welcomed me with open arms and a binding betrothal contract. They would have let me take in Tom, and I could have raised him as my son. Maybe I would have found love, respect, or even happiness. I didn't need you. I didn't need to interfere with Merope and her plans for Tom's father. Do you know why? Why, out of all the things I could have done, I chose this. I wanted to prove that had Tom grown up under different circumstances, he would have never turned out the way he did. I wanted to prove that the magical world failed him and everyone else by proxy. I am not a good person." Hermione held up her hand to stall Albus from disagreeing. "I used to be. I was a bright, shiny example of why the purest beliefs were complete twaddle. I revelled in it. I was prideful and arrogant, as I'd always accused Malfoy of being. Years of being on the run desperately trying to do the things that are impossible just because I wanted to stay alive, or trying to complete the other impossible task of destroying the evil wizard who had put a price on all of our heads changed that. It changed everything. It showed me that there was no line that I wouldn't cross, no law I wouldn't break, despite any personal repercussions for myself, to ensure the safety and prosperity and happiness of my family. That is when I finally understood you. Every decision you made, all the callous choices, it all became clear. When you lose something that you are responsible for protecting because of a foolish mistake, it changes you. It casts a pall over every single aspect of your life, and it never leaves you. Not ever. Time doesn't dull the pain or ease the guilt. It is always there sucking at you. It shapes you, makes you darker, harder. That is also why I did as Merope asked and accepted your betrothal on her behalf. I know you will not be so callous with his life as you were with Ariana's, in the same way I was with the lives of my friends too. I still don't like that you're marrying her. I feel like everything is slipping out of my control, and that scares the bloody hell out of me. I'm here this time for one reason, and one reason alone, and that reason is Tom. To not have direct control over his upbringing terrifies me. On top of that, I have made a vow to search for the current Dark Wizard so that you can play house with a little boy who could grow up to be the evilest Dark Wizard in history. That frightens me even more. You are not the man I would have picked for the job. If you could choose anyone in the entire world, who would you have chosen as a father for Tom? Albus asked curiously, yet quietly, accepting the somber nature of their talk. If I could choose anyone, past, present, or future, to be Tom's father, I would choose my own dad. He would have been proud of Tom and what he could do. He would brag to anyone who would listen of Tom's brilliance. My dad would have loved him, would have done anything for him, as he did with me. Even your father was human, Hermione. He would have eventually seen Tom for what he was. Yeah, she nodded, agreeing sadly. But Tom would have been loved. And you don't think I can love him? I think you would love him as much as you are capable, despite the grieving guilt from your past. But I watched you manipulate Harry his entire life, and I believe that you loved him as much as you could love anyone. Tom needs better than that. You aren't going to disappear just because you aren't his mother, Hermione. You will still make a great impact on his life, more so than the rest of us, I think. He will be fascinated with you, his interesting aunt. You will shape him into a man far more than you realize. Kids need love just as much as they need food and shelter, but they also need the freedom to explore their own capabilities. You, nor Merope, nor I, will always be at his side to make sure his decisions are not detrimental. The best you can do is help us raise him to be a good man and hope. Can I trust you with him? Hermione turned and asked Albus seriously, looking him straight in the eye. I will become an outstanding father. Please trust me in this. Albus went back to the table and tucked his napkin into the neck of his dress robes, smiling as he sat to work, eating the breakfast Jasper had prepared for him. Hermione drank the rest of her coffee, and with a click of her heels exited the rooms, one flicking as she went, making last-minute fixes on her way to Merope's room as the guests started to arrive. Are you ready? Hermione smiled at Merope, who had visibly calmed down in the few minutes that she was alone. I heard you and Albus. Of course you did. You have no sense of privacy. Hermione snorted and then asked curiously, What did you think? I think that you don't give Albus enough credit. I don't know exactly what you both were talking about with his past, but I do know this. I've been around enough dark and abusive wizards to know that he isn't one. Albus would treat me and any children well. I think I could fall in love with him. I'm just scared he will think about this, truly think about who I am and run, despite the agreement you have come to. Look who my family is. Look at the father of my child. It would be stupid not to jump ship. If I were a better person, I would marry him. But I need him for Tom, for myself. Please, Hermione, I need your support in this. Hermione sat hard, blinking rapidly in shock. You think you could love him? I do. That changes everything, Hermione said, smiling at Merope, as she stood and lifted the intricate lace veil and settled it perfectly on the bride's head. "I wish you both every happiness." Merope grabbed her hand and squeezed it, letting the fear show on her face. "Any sensible man wouldn't be able to ignore someone so beautiful and interesting. Don't sell yourself short. You're smart and funny and loyal. He's so very lucky to have you. Besides, Tom is one of the most brilliant wizards ever. He had to have gotten it from somewhere, and after meeting his father, I'm pretty confident it wasn't him." Merope laughed and pulled Hermione in for a hug. "It's time I become a married woman." Hermione led Merope through the house, stopping in front of the French doors that led to the beautiful gardens. "Wow!" Merope breathed as the wind whipped the sheer white curtains around them. Albus stood in front of the bower, hands clasped in front of him, smiling nervously at something that Aberforth whispered in his ear. "Do you want me to walk you down the aisle?" Hermione asked.
"No matter how hard you try, you are not actually Merope's family,"
a gruff voice said from behind them, and they turned, shocked as Malvolo stood uncomfortably in handsome black dress robes.
"I will be taking my daughter down the aisle to her husband."
"Father?" Merope asked. It wasn't that long ago he was threatening, abusive, and allowed others to abuse her. Hermione narrowed her eyes in suspicion. Why was he playing nice all of a sudden?
"You didn't think I would miss your wedding, did you?"
Malvolo muttered, offering his arm. Merope had stars in her eyes and was glowing. "Is that what you want?" Hermione whispered to Merope and watched helplessly as Merope slid her hand into the crook of her father's arm while nodding. As a string quartet began to play the wedding march, they took their first steps out onto the silk runner that led to Albus. Step by step, they closed the distance to the bower. Merope was twinkling, shining, glowing, and she held tight to Malvolo's arm. Hermione felt a lump in her throat, and her eyes began to prickle. A deep gratitude towards the Smurg welled in her, and she knew for certain that this was just another step in setting Tom's life on a better path. Guilt twisted in her stomach as she thought of Draco and his daughters. Perhaps she shouldn't be so quick to vilify Albus' inability to move past his guilt. She wasn't sure she would ever forgive herself for what she did to get there. Did that make her a bad candidate to influence Tom too? Merope was right. She was not giving Albus enough credit. "Weddings always make me tear up," a husky voice murmured into Hermione's hair. Long fingers slid over the silk of her hips until her palms rested on her abdomen. Gellert Grindelwald pulled her back into him, setting his chin in the cradle between her neck and her shoulder. "Grindelwald," she said by way of greeting. Her whole body tingled as if she just stepped out of a hot spring into a cold winter air, and she marveled at how well they fit together, how his hard body wrapped around hers, all firm muscle and teasing lips. "I brought an extra handkerchief just for you." He pressed his smiling lips onto her skin and reached into his robe pocket before holding the handkerchief in front of her face. "Aren't you just a consummate gentleman?" she said as she took the silk square from his hand and balled it up tightly in her fist. "I am." They both fell silent as Malvolo handed Merope over to Albus and sat in the front row seat that had been reserved for Hermione. It didn't bother her overly much. She didn't mind watching from the house. "Why are you here?" "Your beloved sister's getting married. I thought you might need a shoulder to commiserate on." "And you thought that shoulder ought to be yours?" "I did think I was most qualified." "Qualified?" "I'm devilishly handsome. I hear that is all the rage, strong, beautiful women crying on the shoulder of handsome men." "If that is the only prerequisite, I'm sure I would be quite well attended," Hermione said, even as she grimaced and glanced at Magnus Prince as he turned in his seat to pin her with his black stare. "Replaced me already, have you?" Gellert said as Prince turned back around, having been prodded rather viciously by his elderly mother. "It's hard to replace someone who was never there in the first place." "Ouch! You go straight for the family jewels, don't you?" "Don't pretend like you are hurt. There's nothing between us and you know it." "I know no such thing, Hermione. Every time I'm near you, your body thrums with energy and desire. Don't bother to lie, I can smell it on you." His nose skimmed her neck, and she felt the rush through her body, just like he predicted. "You and I are on opposite sides of this conflict. It could never work." "You could join me." "Except for the vow," Hermione snarked. "If there's anyone who has a reason why these two should not be wed, Speak now or forever hold your peace, the officiant said, holding his wand aloft, readying for the bonding magic that would take place next.
I have a reason,
Marvolo said as he stood. A gasp washed over the crowd and Hermione's rage fled.
Never a dull moment around here,
Gellert muttered as Hermione stormed down the aisle and brandished her wand, forcing Marvolo immobile and silent as Merope stood frozen, hands and elbows with tears in her eyes. "Nothing to see here," Hermione said airily as she marched down the aisle as if she was Marvolo's attendant at a mental facility and had just found her missing charge. "Ignore him, he's confused. I'll take him inside and get him some water." She nodded at each person as she passed by, continuing to mutter, "I'll help him right now to his grave." Aberforth smiled wide, having heard the last and left Albus' side.
Great idea, Hermione. Let me help you.
He grabbed the back of Marvolo's robes and dragged him down the aisle. Magnus Prince stood and followed them back to the house. Gellert took over the second they cleared the threshold and flicked his wand in complicated petals, binding the man to a chair and silencing the room, obviously anticipating an interrogation while simultaneously blocking Prince from entering the house behind Hermione. "You did that on purpose," Hermione whispered to him, gesturing to Prince, who was trying to tear down the wards that kept him outside.
What the fuck is he doing here?
Aberforth interrupted, staring furiously at Gellert. "How if I know?" Hermione muttered as she lifted the silencing charm on Marvolo.
Unhand me.
"Instead of acting like an adult, you have to humiliate Merope in front of everyone. Why?"
Bride price. It was never discussed. Pureblood etiquette still has to be followed, even if he is a filthy half-breed.
"Bride price has already been discussed and agreed upon. You need not to worry about providing your daughter with a dowry. I have already done so." Hermione sneered.
What did Albus ask for?
Aberforth and Gellert asked together. Hermione looked at Aberforth as if he sprouted another hat. "You were there. You were our bonder."
"Oh, Merlin, is anyone going to fill me in?" Gellert said, annoyed. "She will to hunt you down,"
Aberforth said, with quite a bit of smugness.
"Oh, that,"
Gellert said, losing interest. Aberforth's smug smile dropped immediately.
"That is what he bargained for when he asked for my daughter,"
Marvolo yelled. "Albus Dumbledore is wealthy enough that he need never work again, though he will. Merope and their children will never want for anything. He wanted something from me as the bride price, and it wasn't something small either. You make it sound like it's an easy thing to ask for."
"How is it not easy? Grindelwald is standing right there."
He gestured with a nod of his head at the revolutionary leader.
"In your fucking house."
"I've not been caught," Gellert said cheerfully.
"I'm here to be her date."
Aberforth raised a single brow at her, and Marvolo glared mutinously. "That is a damned lie," she hissed. "He wasn't even invited."
"And yet I am here. I aim to please."
"You are not helping."
"Now, who's lying? I'm the one who bound him to the chair. That's me, Mr. Helpful."
"Merlin's fucking balls!" Hermione growled in frustration. She turned towards Marvolo and asked him in the calmest voice she could muster. "What is it that you want, Marvolo?"
"The gold ring. Once she's married, she has no claim to it. I want it returned."
"I will pass along the message, but you humiliated her. I rather think your odds are slim."
"I will disown her,"
Marvolo threatened. "Yes, I'm sure that after everything you have done to her over the years, this will be a big surprise," Hermione said dryly.
"You have no right,"
Marvolo yelled, fury turning his red face, spittle flying from his mouth. "I have every right," Hermione said coolly, leaning closer with a dangerous glint in her eyes, all humour gone. "No one, not even the Ministry, could stop me from doing what I am tasked to do. I would burn this world to the ground before I let anyone, including you, cock it all up. You want fairness? You want a patriarchal word? You want to do what you want without consequences? Fuck off, Marvolo Gaunt. Go back to your hovel and live like a hermit. Be glad that you will walk away from this with your life and take heart in knowing that your line will live on, connected to Albus Dumbledore. It is quite literally the best case scenario."
"It is quite reassuring to hear that, because I could have sworn you said the exact opposite this morning,"
Albus said, as the newly wedded couple walked through Grindelwald wards as if they were nothing. Hermione turned to raise a brow at Gellert, only to find empty space. Perhaps it wasn't only Dumbledore who feared a meeting.
Yes, well,
Hermione sniffed disdainfully.
I still have my reservations.
Merope smiled wide, trying to hide tears welling in her eyes as she looked anywhere but at her father. She kept her arm looped with Albus and squeezed as if his arm was a flotation device that was the only thing that kept her from drowning.
What does he want?
The ring.
How about I give it to my firstborn son? If Malfoy doesn't marry, and I doubt he will, it will be my son's birthright.
You are forgetting one major detail, girl, marveled his bed. No half-blood brat will ever wear the proud gaunt family ring.
The name may once have been proud, but there is no pride left to the name, Hermione said coldly.
Look at you. You hold no properties except the one you currently reside. You are poor and no longer allowed your seat on the Wizengamot. You no longer hold the respect of your peers. There's nothing left to the name Gaunt. Merope brings respectability back to the name by marrying Albus.
Why, at least we were still pure,
he said scathingly.
Inbred, you mean? Hermione sneered. Give it a rest, Marvolo. There's nothing else for you here. Just go.
Bertrand Merope is off somewhere on a great adventure if this is how it is always going to be with you.
Release me,
he demanded.
Father,
Merope said,
is there a way we can work past this? It doesn't have to be like this.
You married well below your status.
And who else was I going to marry? The Malfoy heir?
She snorted.
We were so much less in their eyes, all of their eyes. No one that would have been deemed worthy would have deigned to marry me. We may have been pure, but we were from the dregs of the society. There would be no advantage for any of those men to marry someone like me. I don't even have to tell you our circumstances that you never made better. You didn't provide any way for me or Morphin to marry where you would have approved, especially after Mother's death. Rather suspicious it was, and no one in their right mind would have entrusted a daughter to our family.
I didn't harm a hair on your mother's head.
True, because that was really all that was left, wasn't it? For Polyjuice.
You ungrateful whore.
Albus pulled his wand and aimed it at Marvolo calmly.
You need to leave, and I would appreciate it if you didn't come back. No one speaks to my wife that way. No one.
Marvolo buried his teeth, snarling, unable to string together a slur bad enough to lay at Albus' door. With a wave of his wand, Marvolo was free and, still apoplectic, made his way to the door. At the last second before leaving the way he had come, he turned and snarled at Merope.
This is not over.
Albus clenched his teeth, and a muscle worked continuously in his jaw, his wand still primed for battle.
That was well done, Albus, Hermione said. I guess my fears have been unfounded.
I told you that I would never hurt her, that I would protect her. You were judging me for things that I have not done and probably will never do. Not to Dumbledore, you remember. But I would like to believe that there is no reality that I do not fiercely protect my own family, my own wife, from anyone, even her father.
Hermione nodded and smiled. All right, Albus, you've made me a believer. Take care of them for me.
Where are you going?
I have a Dark Lord to stop.
He was here just a few minutes ago, wasn't he?
Aberforth interjected irritably.
Grindelwald was here,
Albus said. Merope was getting married. He came to bait me because he knew I wouldn't do anything to interrupt Merope's wedding. Plus, it was very helpful while I was training my Volo. Merope smiled, clearly trying to shake off her father and his hurtful ways.
I knew you liked him.
You have a skewed perception of things. She smiled wider and bumped Albus with her elbow and said,
How much do you want to bet that Grindelwald gives it all up just to be with our darling Hermione?
Hermione rolled her eyes.
If only it were that easy.
I bet 50 galleons that Grindelwald cannot nor will ever stop his conquest of subjugating the Muggles, Albus said.
I'll take that bet,
Merope said smugly.
I'll add another 50 if he turns himself into the Aurors,
Aberforth said. I hate you all so much right now, Hermione said before stomping away. Merope laughed and called to her.
Jasper will kill you if you miss the cake.
Hermione narrowed her eyes, but stopped all the same. The struggle was readily apparent within her whole body. Respect the wishes of the head house elf that refuses to accept any form of payment or stomp off to cool down somewhere else. Merope smiled smugly as Jasper wishes one out.
Fine,
Hermione said dramatically, still shooting glares at Merope, who was pretending to be unaware, but was also smiling happily at her victory. You definitely would have been in Slytherin, she mumbled in poor grace as they walked back outside. The chairs had been moved, and a large wooden platform took center stage as the couple walked back outside. Small tables surrounded the cleared wood floor, and Hermione and Aberforth anonymously and non-verbally sat together at the same table. Magnus Prince was once again sitting next to his mother, anger like burning coals smouldering in his eyes. Hermione doubted anyone ever said no to him, or avoided him, or did anything other than beg for his attention. She rolled her eyes and turned her focus back to Moreau. Once again, the bride was shining, a bubbling smile lit her face, and her unannounced pregnancy made her glow. She was beautiful, and Hermione knew that Tom Riddle would be the luckiest boy in the entire world with a mother like her. Thankfulness nearly drowned her. Without the Smurg, without Draco and his willing acceptance, without her own tenacious spirit, she wouldn't have had the pleasure of meeting Moreau. The only thing that could make this whole thing better would be the knowledge that, in the end, it was worth it, that she did the right thing, that all the sacrifices she made for herself and others were worth it. She wished she could see in the future and know she was doing right by Tom. She wished that the Smurg had told her exactly what steps she needed to take for Tom to turn out better. She wished it was easier, knowing what the right thing was. Hermione was brought back to the present, as Moreau's laughter floated over to her where she sat next to Aberforth, while the bride and groom fed each other bites of cakes. The great thing about Aberforth was that he didn't need to fill long silences with pleasantries.
"I've been trying to get to you all day,"
said a voice in her ear, a voice that sent chills up and down her spine. The fear of failing a potion or being ridiculed for waving her hand in the air stole over her. She wrapped around, nearly convinced that Snape was indeed standing right behind her. But it wasn't Snape. It was his better-looking relative, Magnus Prince. "I've been busy." "Yes, with your charity case," he sneered. "My rope is like a sister to me. It would be a mistake to treat her otherwise. And with such a promising match, she is now a useful connection. But Dumbledore isn't the only powerful connection to have," he continued, then sat beside her. Aberforth stood at the same time, leaving her to defend against Prince alone. Hermione grabbed at Aberforth's arm, and for several seconds they scuffled, her desperately trying to prevent him from leaving, and him desperately trying to get away from the undoubtedly awkward scene. With one last yank, Aberforth was free, and with a speed that Hermione couldn't believe possible, left her alone with her new suitor, however unwanted. She slowly turned in her chair to face Prince. "I have many connections." "I have no doubt of that, Miss Slytherin. Do you know how much the goblins had been bribed over the course of the last several hundred years for the privilege of that vault that was considered unclaimed? It was wildly believed that there were no longer any living relatives to claim the vault, but to the last the goblins refused. And then you came along and opened a Slytherin family vault, all the while touting the name itself. For the goblins to acknowledge you as heir to the vault, but also to the name, you have to be the real deal. You are the most desirable woman alive, and it doesn't hurt anything that you are powerful and beautiful to boot. I could be a good husband to you, a good connection." He leaned in and lowered his voice. "I would be the most attentive lover." "How considerate," said another, less amused voice. Hermione looked up with the deepest gratitude at Gellert Grindelwald. "I thought you left," Hermione said. "I had need of the loo," he said, averting his eyes, and Hermione smirked. She didn't believe him at all, but at this moment she could have kissed him anyways. "And who are you?" Magnus Prince asked, in his best pureblood, "I'm better than you" voice. "I am her fiancé. Do you mind?" He gestured to the seat that Prince was sitting. "Thank you for keeping her entertained for me." His mouth said thank you, his eyes and tone said fuck off. With a supreme grace, Prince rose, and as he left, bumped his shoulder into Gellert. "It's not really a great idea to antagonize someone who can make your life difficult if he found out who you are." "What? You aren't going to yell at me for publicly claiming you?" "I would have gone along with anything if it meant getting rid of him."
He's not as bad as all that, surely. He reminds me of someone. Someone you don't like. Yes and no, she said, shrugging, trying to hide her grimace. It's complicated. It didn't matter in the end that Snape had turned out to be on their side. Didn't matter that he spent his whole life loving Lily Potter. She would never get over the years of verbal abuse and horrendous treatment of Harry. A grown-ass adult shouldn't ever treat a child the way he treated Harry, despite his parents. She possibly could forgive him his treatment of her, but it was the treatment of her friends that solidified his place in her mind. Yes, he deserved respect as a potions master, their professor and their spy, but that was where her respect ended. Well, do you know what that means? What? Hermione asked, confused. Tonight, you are mine. Until Albus comes over, and then you will have to seek out the loo again, she surmised. He pretended not to hear. Are we just going to pretend that you don't know that we are on opposite sides of this war? That I will be actively trying to stop you? Tonight, you are not Hermione Slytherin, Dark Lord Hunter, and I'm not Gellert Grindelwald, the most wanted wizard alive. He winked at her. Tonight, I am your fiancé, and you are mine. You're too charming for your own good, Hermione added. I'll take that as consent, Gellert said happily. Dance with me. Fine, she smiled and slipped her hand into his waiting one. He led her onto the middle of the dance floor with other couples and pulled her into a waltz, expertly leading her around the floor. I didn't know you could dance like this, she said breathlessly, and racked her brain for all the details she's ever learned about Grindelwald. Even with all the books she had studied, never was there anything about this. What else did he excel at that wasn't in the books? You, my dear, have never asked. He sniffed with fake disdain, teasing her. She voiced even as he spun them around on the dance floor. That is not something I often tell people. It will have to be our little secret, he said. Another secret, Hermione muttered, rolling her eyes, and apparently the best-kept one, too. What was that, my lovely wife-to-be? He asked loudly, drawing the attention of several dancers. Is that... Hermione trailed off, looking over his shoulder. Is that Albus? He quickly turned around and scanned the crowd where Hermione had been looking, and stopped only as Hermione began laughing. He passed his lips. That was not funny, he deadpanned. Hermione just laughed harder, drawing even more attention to them. When the music died down, Gellert led her off the dance floor and back over to the table, bent her hand in a formal, stately bow, and kissed her knuckles. Until next time, dear heart. Are you leaving? Duty awaits. Hermione's hands clenched his, refusing to let go. Her face held not a trace of pleasant humour. She had been in all night. You mean Ermengarde? That is only but one small fraction of my plans. I can't let you leave knowing you are going to do Merlin knows what. And how, my dear, are you going to stop me? Hermione let go of his hand, and his face flushed with triumph until Hermione reached up and slid her fingers into the hair on the nape of his neck and tucked his mouth down to hers. He tasted incredible, exactly how she imagined, all soft, pliant flesh, meeting, caressing, sucking. She leaned into him, letting his hard, lean body support her, letting his hand smooth over her waist, down to the small of her neck. Back. Kissing him because she wanted to, needed to, despite telling herself it was to keep him there, to keep him away from his illegal activities. She wasn't sure who was more surprised, him, her, or Merope, who squeaked the moment their lips met. I knew it! Merope breathed. Gellert jerked back, staring at Hermione, studying her face. This changed everything. That kiss that she didn't want to know about, that kiss she had refused to give him at Ermengarde, was exactly the kind of kiss she always dreamed about when she thought of such things. It was all fireworks and magic. Merope? Albus' voice carried to them as the groom struggled to reach them through the dancing couples. Gellert pulled Hermione close again and kissed her in a swift but sweeping fashion and turned away, melting into the crowd, leaving Hermione dazed. She could still taste him on her, smell the spicy scent of him on her robes. Everything all right? I heard you yell, Albus said, as he finally reached them. Hermione vigorously shook her head and hoped that Merope would get the message. She didn't understand by Hermione's obvious overtures. Perhaps her overly large, wild eyes would have done it. I was just surprised, is all. Hermione's all alone. I wanted to meet the dashing man who had convinced her to dance. Yes, who was that?
He asked at her curiously.
We didn't get a good look.
Hermione opened and closed her mouth over and over like a fish, still mentally reeling from their kiss.
It looked like the same man who keeps running into us, yes?
Merope saved her eyes twinkling in a very Dumbledorian-esque manner, which suited since she was now Dumbledore, and so Tom would be. For a moment, that in itself blew her mind. Tom Dumbledore. Wow.
Someone has been habitually running into you?
Albus asked, worried.
Yup.
Merope popped the P on yup and chuckled to herself when Hermione narrowed her eyes.
But don't worry, if he was dangerous, I doubt Hermione would kiss him.
To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Smurg by Jessiy Y. Read by Ella Max Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.